Greetings, folks. Professor Fiore here. And this video is for all of you potential textbook authors out there. Just for you. Now, who am I, right? If you haven't seen my other videos, I've got 300 or so videos up here. Who am I? Jim Fiore. I've taught at a local college for about 40 years in the area of electrical engineering technology. I've written 5 textbooks and 7 lab manuals to go along with that. I've gone through the typical commercial publisher route. I've also done the personal, right, individual publishing, self-publishing, to create open educational resources, OERs. I have a little bit of experience here, and I would like to share that. Hopefully, I can help you on your journey to creating a textbook. Now, what are the good reasons to write a textbook? Well, first reason, publish or perish, right? I don't think I have to say much more about that. That may affect some of you, it may not. Second reason, you can't find a good textbook. Maybe you've developed a new course. There really isn't a good textbook for it. This happened to me a few years back. I designed a course for generic microcontrollers and no book. Okay, not what I wanted to do. So I wrote a book. Got really good feedback from the students. The course was a success. Happy, happy, joy, joy. Several years before that, when I was teaching operational amplifiers and linear integrated circuits, there were a bunch of books out there that were pretty good, but I couldn't find one book, and I didn't want to have students, buy 3 textbooks. So I thought, ultimately I could do a better job. I could create the one textbook that I really wanted. Off we go. Probably a third reason would be you think you're going to get rich from royalties. And I'm going to tell you right up front, chances are that's not going to happen. All right. If your idea is to make a lot of money, there are easier ways to make money than to write books. You might be really lucky. You might be fortunate and get, a hit on your hands, but it's difficult. So, think of it this way. In most fields, right? So if you're going to write a physics book or a chemistry book or, a book on, electrical circuit analysis, something like this, a foundational book that a lot of students are going to use, there's probably a couple of heavyweights out there already. And trying to break into there and get a big chunk of that market is going to be difficult. Not saying it can't be done, but it's an uphill climb. If you publish in a more niche area, that's a little easier, but of course, the audience is a lot smaller. So, you got a little balancing act going on here. It's kind of tricky. All right, what to do. Ultimately, I kind of think it's got to be a sort of a personal thing. You've got something to say, you need to say it. Off we go, we create a book, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of divide this discussion up into 2 pieces, 2 different videos. The first part, this one, I'm going to talk about my experiences with commercial publishing. And then in the second part, I am going to talk about self-publishing, creating open educational resources. All right? So, what's my story, right? Like I said, I'm an electrical engineer. I taught in the electrical engineering technology and engineering science curriculums. So, for those of you that are in other science and technology fields, the things that I'm going to talk about here as far as the books, they're going to be very similar. Now, if you're, thinking of writing a book on sociology or French literature or something like that, there are issues that are going to be a little bit different, but there's going to be a lot of common ground as well. Okay? So the first thing is you have to kind of show that you can write. So it's good if you have some background. Now, obviously, people that are teaching, you probably have either a master's or a PhD, so you've done some writing, right? But that's a little bit different. Research writing is a little bit different than trying to write a textbook. Now, in my case, I was writing articles for technical magazines, like C User's Journal, for example. And, I had done that for several years. And one day, an acquisitions editor came into my office at the college and said, hey, we're looking for potential authors. We're expanding. We're going into science and technology. Are you interested? Do you have any ideas? So at this point, what will happen is they'll be looking for a treatment. In other words, they want an idea of what you're proposing. They would like a table of contents. What are the topics and your particular field, your specialty, right? You're going to write your book on. They're going to want a sample of your writing, probably a chapter, maybe a sample chapter. They're going to want some ideas in terms of where you feel your book is going to sit in the market in terms of what are your competition, right? What books out there are you going to go up against? What are their strengths and weaknesses? Things like this. They're going to take all that. They're going to do their market research, figure out if your book is going to sort of fit in, and they're going to take your sample chapter and your table of contents and things like that, and they're going to send them off to independent reviewers. And those people are going to look at them and say, yeah, this is good. This person writes well. It's lucid. It's clear. I like the way this person writes. Or they might say, not so much, or there's things missing in the table of contents, or these things are in a really weird order, right? Anyway, once that's all fleshed out, they're going to say, okay, we like it. We're going to go ahead with this. Here's a contract. Oh, here's where the fun starts, the contract. Now, I have never written a book for a publisher that was an ebook, right? I've written good old-fashioned paper books, okay? So I can't speak exactly to what's happening today in the ebook market, but I can't imagine, given my experiences in the publishing industry, that it's really any better than it used to be when we were only doing print books, be that as it may. The contract will stipulate, among other things, a timeline, like what's the expected timeline on them getting certain chapters and things like this. And ultimately, your rights, your responsibilities, and your royalties. Ooh, that's the one everybody wants to hear about. What are the royalties? All right, so a typical book contract for a textbook would be something like 15% of bookstore wholesale. So if you had a book that cost the students $100, right? Wholesale for the bookstore, it was like maybe 60%. So they're going to pay $60 for that $100 book that they're going to sell to the student. And you're going to get 15% of the 60. You're going to get $9. All right, so you get $9. The bookstore gets $40. Hey, that's pretty interesting. And of course, the publisher, of course, gets the balance to cover all their stuff. All right, something like a lab manual, or a booklet kind of thing, much smaller, thinner, might only be 10%. Then there'll be a separate stipulation for translations, foreign sales, and things like that. And that can be pretty tricky because, books can get sold to subsidiaries, which then sell them cheaply somewhere, across the seas. So, your effective value may not be what you think it's going to be, right? There's ways of playing with these numbers, not to your necessary advantage. That's business, right? Okay. The most important thing here is that this is what's called a work for hire. You lose all rights to your work. Your name is on the book, you're the author, but you have ultimately no control over it, right? You write it, it's all your outline, it's all your material, but you have no control over it once it's published. It's owned by the rights to the book, the copyright is owned by the publisher. So you're no different than anybody else that's involved in this process. Right? This is a very important thing to remember. You have no control over the price of the book. You have no control over reprintings or new editions. It's entirely up to the publisher. All right? If your book is successful, you might get on what I call the editions roller coaster. And what this is a way of maintaining sales. The first year of your sales are not going to be very high because your book is new, people don't know it. As word gets out, assuming it's a good book, right, sales will go up. So you go, first year, second year, third year might be around the same, might drop off a little bit. Hey, why would it drop off? Used books. Used books come on the market. Students buy those instead of the new books. You don't get anything for a used book, right? You only get new books. And then it drops off after that. So, after maybe 3, 4, 5 years, depending, the publisher might ask you to do another edition just to keep the sales up. Okay? That helps them, obviously. It helps you. Doesn't help the students because it really drives up the price of the textbook. I've taught out of books that literally every 3 or 4 years, new edition, just to keep that income stream coming. But what they did is they might take a big chapter and split it in two. They might take 2 chapters and swap them, right? 8 becomes 9, 9 becomes 8. Why? Because most professors will say, here's the book, latest edition. By just changing it, that gets rid of all of those old used books, right? It sort of zeroes the counter, if you will. We keep things going. The student winds up having to pay for that, though, because creating a new edition isn't free. There's a cost associated with it. So that helps drive up the cost of the books. All right? Not a good situation. But be that as it may, when you sign that contract, most likely you're going to work with a team of people. They're going to work with a copy editor. They're going to work with an illustrator, right? Especially if, like I said, you're in this sort of science technology thing. You're going to have things. You're going to have, like in my case, circuit schematics, output graphs, parameter graphs, data sheets, data tables, all of this kind of stuff. And you're going to need a professional illustrator to take your little sketches and line drawings and turn them into publication quality things. Okay? Along with the copy editor, who's going to mold your prose into something useful, right? It's very difficult to copy edit your own material. I was very fortunate in my first book, which is I worked with a copy editor who was a technical editor at Fairchild Semiconductor. So they knew the nomenclature, they knew the lingo, the whole thing. It was a great experience, right? The illustrator I had was also great, did excellent work. So these are useful things, right, to learn about. There's something that most new novice authors don't think of, and that's the actual layout of the book. In other words, well, what's the print size of it? Right, that's kind of an obvious thing, but what are you going to use for the font for the body copy? And what about the heads and the subheads? What's the design of the book? What's it going to look like? What, the margins. If you have examples, right, you have exercises in there, how are they going to be set off from the body copy? Is it going to be in a different font? Is it going to be in a box? Is it going to be indented? Are you going to put a little grayscale screen behind it? Questions. Even like mundane things. You've got, pictures and so forth that need captions. How are those things numbered? Are the captions going to be italicized or not? Is it going to be numbered like 11.3, chapter 11, illustration 3? Is it going to be 11-3? Somebody's got to make a decision on these, and it's got to be held consistent across the whole thing, right? That's usually not up to you, unless you're going to self-publish. People design that stuff, and they're going to take care of those kind of details as you create the body copy and the headlines and so forth, and what you expect for a caption. They're going to be the ones that sort of shape that whole thing into a recognizable, consistent sort of format, right? Okay, very useful. Now, ultimately they have the same rights that you do. You're a mercenary, right? You've given up all your rights. This is a work for hire. So, the illustrator gets paid a certain amount of money for doing the illustrations. Well, you're going to get royalties. You're paid in a different way, but you are doing a work for hire. They own the copyright. Okay? I know your name's on the book, but your hands are kind of tied. Okay? All right, so after all of this, you get a book. Okay, now in my case, that book was on operational amplifiers and linear integrated circuits. So somewhere around 1992, out comes this book. Yay, I'm a published author. Okay, look, my name's down here and everything. Okay, it's nice. It's nice to say, oh, look, I wrote this. Okay, and you can see all this good stuff. Interesting. Once you write a book, you become very cognizant of book design. You open up new textbooks and you look at them and you go, what font did they use? How did they lay this out? How did they do this? How did they do that? Right? And you might start nitpicking them and saying, that's good, that's not so good. In any case, it's a learning experience. So, I get the book out there. Happy, wonderful. Well, again, always keep in the back of the mind, you're essentially kind of like a mercenary here. You have no rights. My publisher decides they're going to get out of science and technology. They sell off all of the titles to other publishers. My book happens to go to another publisher. That publisher eventually became Cengage, right? They got purchased and purchased again and so on and so forth. This was in the late 90s, all right? So I had contacted the editor and said, it's probably about time that we do a second edition. And you're the new publisher, so what do you say? And they said, oh, that sounds good. As a matter of fact, we'll also do a lab manual. So we'll have a lab manual to go along with this, and there'll be a separate contract. All right, so like I said, you get maybe 15% for a textbook. For something like a lab manual, 10% would be typical for something like that. All right, so I go through the same process. And a second edition is certainly easier. A subsequent edition is easier. All right, you're not coming up with prose from whole cloth. In my case, I'm going through and deleting, obsolete integrated circuits and adding new ones, and off we go, right? Okay. So out comes somewhere around 2001 or so, out comes the second edition. Now, because it's a new publisher, they never called it a second edition. I can understand why, but I think it would have had a little bit more gravitas in the market, having been called a second edition. But, right, this is their version of it. Of course, the cost went up. I think the original version was somewhere around, $65, $70, something like that. And now we're over $100. And again, I have no control over that. And this brings up an interesting question. What's the ethical quandary of a professor writing a book and making money on it and then dictating to his students or her students, they have to buy that book? There's a conflict of interest here, right? So one way around this is what I used to say to my students. If you bring me a brand new book that you got from the bookstore with your receipt, I will give you in cash whatever my royalty is. Right? I'll make $0 on the book in my class, right, for you. Most of my students wound up buying used books, so I didn't really have to worry about that. But nonetheless, one day I come home from work, right, come home from class, and there's a box on my porch. And there's a whole bunch of these, which is a Spanish language edition, a translation of my book, right? They have complete control over this, right? I think it's kind of cool, right? Here's a book, I took 2 years of Spanish in high school. I don't really remember a whole lot of it. So I can kind of look through this book and it all looks familiar to me, but I really can't read it. Interesting, right? Some years after that, they made a cost-reduced version for the Indian subcontinent, right? So this is thinner, lighter paper, virtually no margins and such. And, when it comes to foreign sales, that can be kind of tricky because they might sell your book off to a subsidiary for a low price and, you're only getting a certain percentage. And so that whole thing can be a bit of an issue, right? Sour grapes. Well, guess what happens? Right? As the price on this book goes up, and now some years later, they're selling a lab manual and textbook combo, right? Cheaper. It's cheaper to buy the combo, a package deal for somewhere around, I think, $230, $240. And I'm just like, wow, this is ridiculous. I can't blame any student for, getting a used book or, whatever. But around that time, the publisher says, hey, guess what? We are getting out of the science and technology publishing business. We're going to go and look at something else. Okay. And what we're going to do unlike what happened earlier, we're not going to sell these titles off. We are just going to sell off whatever is remaining in the warehouse, and after that, these books are out of print. Now, if you do nothing, that book is just history, right? You don't have rights over that book. You can't just take that book and shop it around, right? As a matter of fact, if you don't like what your publisher is doing, most contracts have an element in there that prevent you from being an author or even a co-author on a competing title. So I could not write for another company another op-amp book, even if I was just a co-author. I couldn't do that, right? It's against contract, right? Hands are tied. And that's kind of how you would be, right? If they just said, well, that's it. They're out of print, boom, done. They still own the rights. Well, I contacted them and said, hey, look, since you're completely getting out of here and it doesn't matter anymore, you don't have any other titles that are going to compete with this, would you please give me back my rights so I can take my book and do something else with it? And to their credit, they said, sure, no problem. Now, we have no more interest. We'll give you back the rights. Done. Okay, so that's what they did. And I turned around and I wrote a third edition, right? I went through and, again, updated everything, got rid of the obsolete stuff, put in, updated integrated circuits and so on and so forth. And I published that as an open educational resource. And I put it out there in PDF format and ODT format, open document text. So anybody could get a hold of it, right? Read it on their tablet or, their laptop, computer, whatever. Okay, it's out there for people. I've done that with all my books. And an idea came to me, and I said, there are probably some people like me, maybe older authors, that, like print books. I just prefer print books. I like holding onto a book. I like being able to write in the margins, with a pen and circle things and change diagrams and whatever. So I decided through the KDP, right, the direct publishing through Amazon, I'll put those up there, and maybe there's, like I said, some people like me would get some copies out there, no biggie. Well, it turns out that, it's not just a couple of old professors. Some people do like a hard copy, right, paper. You might be one of them. And, I'm not selling thousands of these things, but I am selling books. Okay, so here is the Amazon version of this. Okay, this is a 600-page book. Okay, the print quality is fine. I have no problems with it. All right. Now, of course, I didn't have an illustrator. I had to do all this stuff myself. I didn't have a copy editor. Fortunately, I had text that had already been copy edited. Right, but in the other texts that I've written, that is not the case. I've had colleagues of mine read through things and give me commentary and so forth. But, doing everything yourself is certainly a little bit more work, okay? But it's nice, okay? So I got a third edition now, right? And here's the cool thing. I have all the rights, right? So if I find a typo in here, I can update it immediately. I just change the PDF file, the ODT file, upload them to my websites. Whoever's using them, you go there, off you go. If you're going to go that route, and I'm going to talk more about this in the part 2 video, if you go that route, you are going to have to come up with some kind of version tracking thing, some scheme so that people know, do I have the latest version and is there a big change? Okay. And then there's the whole issue of, how you want to price this thing. Okay. Currently, this op-amp book, which, as I said before, was 200 and change with the lab manual, this version is like $21 or something like that. And when it initially came out, it was only $15, but Amazon raised their printing prices. Okay, I make like $1 or $2 on a book. And what I do with that is I just, I use that to offset the cost of maintaining my websites and, getting tools and things, right, to create these OER books and videos and stuff, right? So, okay, not going to get rich on it, but that's not my goal, right? So I'm going to talk about that, the whole OER thing in part 2. But I hope that, this discussion, what I've brought up here, has helped you, right? So again, multiple reasons to do this. There's, publish or perish. You could do it because you can't really find the book that you want. You could do it because you think you're going to make money. But again, I'm going to dissuade you on that. You may very well wind up working for, less than minimum wage. It's got to be something that you really want and you really love to do. Then it makes sense. Okay. There's the mechanics. If you go commercial, like I said, there'll be a copy editor. There'll be illustrators and things like that to help you. And again, if you're doing, like I said, French literature or something like that, you're not going to need all of the illustrations that someone who's doing, a mechanical engineering textbook is going to need. So, those are things that you have to kind of weigh. All right. All right. So if you have any specific questions or comments, please, by all means, put them down in the comments. I'll be, more than happy to address any of those things. And just stick around for part 2 of this if you're really interested in doing the self-publishing route. There are some pluses, big pluses. There are some minuses, and we'll talk about those. Okay? So take care. We'll see you next time.